Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the Growing in Greenhouse Cold Frames webinar. I'm Janine Wright. I'm the Senior Communications Specialist at Prospient, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We're excited to have you with us today. And just let you know before we get started, if you have questions for our presenters during the webinar, please enter them in the question box at any time, and we'll either get to them during the presentation or during the Q&A session at the end. So I'm excited to have today's presenters with us. We have Reiner Hernandez. He's the West Coast Commercial Representative for Prospient. He has more than 20 years experience in the ag industry and a strong background in production, product development, research and development. And then we have Mark Rich. He is the Mountain Area Commercial Representative and Systems Engineer at Prospient. He takes customers' kind of concepts, cultivation ideas, and turns them into designs. He specializes in a lot of systems, everything from lighting to CO2, irrigation, benching, water treatment, HVAC, and more. So with that, I will turn the time over to Reiner and Mark for today's presentation and join you later for the Q&A session.
All right. So I can't quite see the slides, but I'll just go from, there we go. So today we're just discussing cold frames. We'll give a very brief introduction on cold frames, pros and cons, high tunnels, and the differences between them. And then we also have some information on a few of our customers that have them, and we can give a little bit more detail on what has worked for them and how they've operated with those cold frames. Next slide. Sorry, there it is. We've already introduced this part. Go on to the next one. So the agenda for us is to, as I said a little bit before, we're going to talk about the differences of cold frames and high tunnels, when to consider a high tunnel, what's worked well for our customers, what they would do differently, limitations the cold frames and high tunnels have, and what additional features that cold or high tunnels can use. All right, to start off, we'll talk a little bit about cold frames and really what they are and what they do. Most times when people are looking at cold frames, they're a cost-effective solution to either extend their growing season or protect their plants during the fall or entering the winter months. These are generally non-permitted structures, so you're going to stick these in the ground. They're temporary structures is a good way to look at most cold frames. And they're not wet set. Some people will wet set them, but they're not set in the ground permanently. They're smaller in profile. As you can see there, that shows two different profiles that we'll talk about a little bit later too in this slide. Typically, they're anywhere from 15 to 25 feet wide. One of our cold frames that we sell, the Columbine, is 30 foot wide. Comes in one flavor. That's the only size. That's another thing with cold frames. They do not have as many options as a high tunnel and or a engineered greenhouse. They're lower to the ground, generally a hoop style house. Sidewalls range from 0 feet to a few feet. It all depends on it. Ours range from 0 to 3 feet. They're compact in height and width. This is intentional. The reason it's intentional is it reduces the total space of the heating area that you need to use. So it makes it more efficient to heat a smaller area, keeps the heat in a range right by the plant zones. Provides warmer nighttime temperatures that help with frost protection during the winter months. This might be a good spot to let Mark speak a little bit to the heat and some of the coverings and some of the thermal aspects of the cold frames.
Yep, thanks, Reiner. And typically when we're looking at a cold frame, we are looking at roof glazing of either corrugated polycarbonate, but most of the time it's going to be either single layer polyfilm or double layer inflated polyfilm. The picture over here on the right is showing corrugated polycarbonate in these photos. And what these are, this is actually a diffuse corrugated polycarbonate. This is this project here, it's a little bit farther south down in Colorado where hailstorms are a little bit more prevalent. So something that we kind of did to kind of help the customer on that end. But when the roof, we're looking at those two glazing systems, the gables and the sidewalls is typically going to be 8mm twin wall polycarbonate or single layer corrugated polycarbonate. Again, in this picture here, you can see the gable, which is the two ends of the photo here, is a clear 8mm twin wall polycarbonate glazing. And the sidewall, on the one on the left, which has the actual sidewall, the 3-foot sidewall, is again a diffused corrugated polycarbonate. And what this picture shows really well is the different sidewall heights. So you can see the one on the left has a 3-foot tall sidewall height, and the one on the right essentially has no sidewall height. And at that point, it's just a bow going from the ground on one end all the way 30 foot across to the other end. And the reason why we're using these different glazing systems is to keep cold frames still efficient at keeping heat and basically winterizing plants, but also and just economical, just make them cheaper, as well as just able for more customers to put them up easier and everything along that. And when we're kind of looking at how heat works in a cold frame, is typically there's not going to be any supplemental heat in a cold frame. What we would typically see is just the glazing systems, basically putting it under a roof and taking advantage of the solar radiation and the solar heat gain that a greenhouse experiences. And the biggest thing with that is by keeping them low to the ground, you're basically reducing the overall volumetric amount of air inside, or just the volume of air inside the greenhouse. And by taking that smaller volume of air and essentially adding the same amount of solar heat gain to that greenhouse, you're going to see increased temperatures. And as most people probably know, in a cold frame, you're not necessarily growing inside of them during the heat of the summer. You're doing it mostly on the colder seasons of the year. So what you're able to do is, without doing really any operational expenses, you're able to keep the temperature inside of that greenhouse significantly higher than if you were to do, say, a 10-foot or a 12-foot tall sidewall. And moving on from there, we've got high tunnels.
Yeah, high tunnels are larger structures, or a larger structure offering, that have more flexibility and growing space. So you can, with these larger structures, we have more area that can be covered over the long run. And you're able to maximize a footprint with having larger widths between 16 all the way to 35. These heights with these 35 foot with the greenhouses, with the roof pitch and the slope, you can get anywhere from an 8.5 foot tall house all the way to an 18 foot tall house. Sidewalls, again, we have a little bit more option. That's the nice thing with the high tunnels. They allow for you to have that between 4 and 6 foot tall. Sometimes we have done custom heights too, but this allows for access to some of the products from the inside of, or the outside of the walls, instead of that 0 to 3 foot. And it can be gutter connected. So a big difference between those cold frames and the high tunnels is that you can group a section of them together and have a large plantable area. If you're looking for 10,000 or 14,000 or even 2,000 square feet, you can put quite a few of these together to maximize your space and have a better growing zone. I think, Mark, did you have anything that you'd like to add to that? Or
yeah, one quick thing is, historically, I think a lot of people would say if you gutter connected two of these structures shown in this photo here, it wouldn't necessarily be a cold frame. But if you were to do it where you have two of the shorter width houses, and I actually had one of my customers up in Montana do this, where they gutter connected two smaller column cold frames or high tunnels, and basically did roll-up sidewalls as seen in this photo, but just on the two ends, and kept that interior column line the same. And they still operated it as a cold frame. And essentially why they did this is because they wanted the structural integrity of having them gutter connected, but then also by using the roll-up sidewalls, they were able to just access it on the sides and still operate it as if it was a high tunnel or a cold frame. But other than that, I think we are good to move to the next one here, Reiner.
Yeah, all right. All right. So here's a couple things if you're considering a high tunnel, what you should be considering. One, like we mentioned before, if you need more space, it allows for more space. One of the big problems with the cold frame is you have one size or one flavor. So you have that 30-foot width. If you need a little bit more or you need a little bit smaller, you don't have the flexibility to put different houses together to your configuration. So a 35-foot width house allows you more. It seems like it's not that much more, but that takes away your walking path. It helps you with having just that 2 feet extra on each end. So it makes a big difference for you. It's ideal for commercial growers when they're scaling up. You can do between 1 and 5 in the single truckload, or sometimes even 6. So they're a very cost-effective solution to add plantable space within your business. Mentioned a little bit before, increased height with these, having that higher Gothic arch or that peak area helps quite a bit with airflow and heat management, because you're able to, during the summer times, you're able to put some of that heat up in the attic space or the higher ridge, and those diverts that air away from the plants and to that space. So, the best part about all these houses, or the main purpose of these houses, is the growing area for the plants, keeping them at the ideal conditions. Can be vented. Our windjammer can be vented at the top with a double polyfilm roof. So if you're still having a little bit more issues with the heat, you can open that vent to release some of the captured heat in the top. As we discussed a little bit before, it's an expandable design. So if you set yourself up and you want a gutter connected, if that's the way you're wanting to approach your structure, you can set columns to gutter connect onto your cold frame and keep expanding year after year if you're going for a cold frame. Mark, would you like to discuss a little about the ventilation?
Yeah, and one thing I would also add too with it is when you were talking about the different widths available on what we call our windjammer, which is our high tunnel, is if you're growing ornamentals and one of your big focuses is hanging baskets, going from 30 foot to 35 foot might allow you to do an entire extra row or maybe even 2 rows of hanging baskets inside of that greenhouse. So what that does is, even though you are 5 foot wider, it's allowing you to make your production space significantly more efficient and allows you just to grow more plants on the inside. And then, every grow and every greenhouse requires a different solution. So sometimes you might only need a 24 foot wide for that. So it all depends on the exact scenario that you're looking at, but having the expandable widths and different options is definitely a huge plus on that side. And going into the venting side is, in a high tunnel, the biggest advantage on a high tunnel is going to be able to do passive ventilation through your sidewalls. And that's what this picture and a couple of the other pictures have shown so far through this presentation, is what we would call roll-up sidewalls. So essentially what this is typically you would have double inflated poly up on the roof, and then on the sidewalls, you could still do what I would call like an inflated poly sidewall, or you can just do a single layer of poly. But what you're doing there is, whether it's a motor or a hand crank, you're essentially rolling up that entire sidewall and allowing air to passively vent through those sidewalls. So instead of adding fans, which is going to add operational expenses and everything like that, you're basically just allowing air to move in and out of the greenhouse through those sidewalls, which is going to allow you to maintain your temperature within the greenhouse significantly better. And again, on the high tunnel, while we were talking with the cold frame about how they have a small volume of air, the high tunnel is going to have a little bit more volume of air, but that also doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. It just means you're able to actually control the temperature inside of there a little bit more. You're able to get more air exchanges through your sidewalls and everything along those lines. So it definitely helps to be able to vent through those sidewalls And to be quite frank, that's how a lot of large scale commercial growers are doing it these days, is they're just rolling up the sidewalls and allowing air to vent through the greenhouse through that, and kind of allowing some of that heat to escape through those sidewalls.
So one of the things about these houses, these high tunnels or our windjammer, is the needs for different conditions. So we have customers all over the country, and everyone's located in different areas and have different climates and have different weather patterns to deal with. So one nice thing with the windjammer compared to our low tunnel or a high tunnel to a low tunnel, in this case, we have the option to strengthen it. They do that one of two ways. We can bring in the sidewalls to a 4-foot bow spacing, or from a 6-foot to help increase the rigidity on it. The other thing we can do with it is we can add different trusses to it. We have a W truss, which is, it's not shown in this one. This just has a crossbar in the center up at the top right there. But a W truss is essentially what we're saying, a W truss that will put every other column. What this does is it will help strengthen the house for higher wind loads, heavy snow loads. By adding this, it helps support those snow loads and distribute it back down into the column lines. Another benefit to having this trellis system, it does help with hanging baskets. If you're going with hanging baskets, now you have a little bit more support to hang those baskets on there, and it does help with the wind. In the picture right there, there's another thing you can't see. There's or you can probably see on the back, you see that they have a hose there. So with our high tunnels and the high tunnels in general, having that crossbar and or having the W truss allows you to hang, I believe the blue one is a watering hose, what they do, and they use it. They also have in the back on the purlins, which are the horizontal bars, you can see irrigation lines hanging down from them. So having the high tunnel gives you these options. A low tunnel is just a bow with they do have purlins, but you can't access the purlins as easily, and you can't add items to them. They may not support it as well.
And Ryder, one thing to add too about the kind of beefing up the structure is even though cold frames and high tunnels, which I would both consider as ground to grounds, typically are not permitted structures, there is a big difference between, especially in parts of your territory and my territory specifically out in the mountains. Even though it's not an engineered structure, it still is a smart thing to buy a ground to ground that is structurally sound, that isn't going to fall every time it snows more than 2 inches outside, than one that is kind of put together at a very cheap expense rate and is able, to have the higher sidewalls and everything, but anytime you get any snow above 2 or 3 inches or any wind, especially in my territory out in Colorado, where big gusts of winds can come at any moment, it helps to make sure that you have that structure beefed up to make sure that they're going to stay up, and you don't have to worry about going in and cutting poly to make sure snow is falling through the roof.
That's a great point to bring up. A lot of times with the low tunnels, we didn't mention that. Most times, low tunnels are sometimes one season. They're not going to handle the snow, so most customers do either roll up, or roll down, or cut the polyfilm, and they leave them open during the winter because it won't hold it. The bows will bend in, or you'll bend the frame, and you'll be starting over. Essentially, what's going on those particular types of houses. High tunnels, the other positive about high tunnels is they can accept multiple types of coverings. So our high tunnels can accept twin wall. If you're looking to go to a 8mm twin wall house, we can put that 8mm twin wall on the gable ends and on the sidewalls and the roof. Polyfilm is done quite a bit. It's very close in the insulation when you have the double inflated. Not on the sidewalls though. If you do it on the sidewalls, it also helps. But polyfilm and twin wall polycarbonate are both accepted on the roof. Polycorrugate we can do on the gable ends for this house, so it accepts those different types of material to help with whatever situation you're looking for. Polycarbonate might last a little bit longer, depending on where you're at. It all depends on what UV you have. The twin or the PC can last anywhere from 15 years before it yellows, and the polyfilm in some high UV areas might only last a couple of years. So it's all a case-by-case situation for what you want to cover your house with.
And another thing I would point out on the high tunnels here as well, Reiner, is just that having that higher sidewall makes working from an employee standpoint so much easier. Mm-hmm. If you can look at this picture, you can see plants all the way at the edge of that sidewall where they're essentially all the way up against those bows. There's still a 6-foot gap between where that arch actually begins. Whereas if you're in a low tunnel or a cold frame where we were showing pictures earlier, if you're pushed all the way up against that sidewall, if you go all the way over there, you have to squat or do the work on your knees, because essentially that roof pitch is starting to start at 3 foot instead of 6 foot. So just from a worker perspective and an employee efficiency, having those higher sidewalls definitely helps a lot on that end as well.
Yeah, I'd like to point out, if you go to our website and we have brochures on the Windjammer, it has a table that will tell you the sidewall heights, and then it'll also tell you the peak heights. So that tends to be a good amount of information if you're looking to hang baskets, or if you're looking to hang something, you would know what the peak heights are and the sidewall heights that can be used on the Windjammer. But I think that goes over most of what we were talking about in considering the high tunnel. And mind you, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll answer them all at the end.
And one thing I would add to this too, Reiner, is looking at this one here. So this is our high tunnel, the Windjammer. It has a Gothic arch to it versus our Columbine, which is the low tunnel cold frame, doesn't have that Gothic appearance to it. And with it, the Gothic appearance obviously has its aesthetic advantages. A lot of people like the way that the Gothic arch looks, but also at the same time, the snow shedding is so much better on a Gothic arch because you are actually at a slant when you're at that ridge or the peak, and it helps with shedding snow during the winter seasons. Whereas when you're kind of just at what I would call just like a semicircle pitch on the roof, you're not really shedding snow at the same rate as you would on a high tunnel. So that's another thing to kind of look at and just investigate when you're trying to figure out which one would be best for your greenhouse operation.
All right. So this is a point where we have several customers that have had these from big to small. And I can start off with one customer. I have a customer out in Washington who has about 6 of these Windjammers. He also has a engineered veil structure of ours that's a completely closed, controlled greenhouse. So he has 2 different things, and he uses them for 2 different purposes. The closed greenhouse, the veil structure, he has a head house on that structure, or on that property, with 3 greenhouses. He uses this structure for his research. So he has benches, he has heating pipes on the walls and underneath the benches. He has irrigation booms hanging from the trusses. So our engineered structures allow for a little bit more equipment to be used in them, and it makes more sense when you're making that investment. However, he loves his Windjammers. He has them set outside. He went with 35-foot wide because he wanted the space or the heat as high as he can. He does not have ventilation, and he has sidewalls. So between the sidewalls and the high peaks, he's able to throw the heat away from his plants, which are located at about 3.5 feet tall on benches. And he uses that the fans and the sidewalls to mechanically and passively vent, just depending on the season, his houses and grow some of his propagation material. When we talk about gutter connected houses, he decided, I was asking him this when I was out there, he decided against gutter connecting it. I asked him why he liked it, because I thought when we talked, it would make more sense to him to utilize his space more efficiently. But when I talked to him, he said it made more sense for him to have 8-foot rows in between each house, because he drives his cars or trucks down the the sidewalls of these houses, and he loads from the benches, has a person inside and a person outside, and they push and load from each section to get their plant material. And he said he wouldn't do it any other way because it just makes more sense, and it's the most effective way for him to do it. The other house is gutter connected, and he said that works for its purpose. But in the production, these are just a very useful and cost-effective way for him to get his plant materials out. We have another large customer on the East Coast. Same thing. They have quite a bit of greenhouse space. I believe they're over 1 million square feet of greenhouse space. And then they also have probably in excess of 75 of these high tunnel style. And the same thing, they load from the sidewalls in carts and then load their trucks. But they use these houses primarily for quick runs and for hardening off plants. So they'll use the large houses to propagate and dial in the temperature to get the plants to root and get them to the stage where they can handle being in a semi-controlled area. And that's true of a lot of growers. I have a person in Redmond, Washington, who does the same thing. They have a propagation house where they can control the humidity, the temperature, and get the plants to root and get them to a certain stage. And after they get them to a certain stage, they'll move them into these ground-to-ground or high tunnel style houses because it's more cost-effective for them to do that.
Yeah, and then also I have a customer as well that does most of their production. They're growing over 100 different species of plants, but what they do is I would consider them like a medium-sized commercial wholesale grower, and they do most of their growing in a gutter connect veil range, but they're expanding at a pretty rapid pace, and doing gutter connects and getting the full site plan and permits and everything for that takes a little bit of time, and they want to make sure that they do that part correctly because that's the bulk of their business, but they know that they need extra greenhouse space and they need it as soon as possible. So what they've been doing is just adding columbines and windjammers one at a time, two at a time, just to give them that extra space, because you can put them up, you can build them in a week, less than a week, they can go up relatively quickly, and they're economical. They allow you to do production out of them. They're just real good for, kind of saving time and get you some covered greenhouse space really quick and still allow you to do some pretty high quality production out of them.
Good. Yeah. All right. That's a lot of, we have many success stories, but those cover a broad range of producers, and it makes a lot of sense to have a little bit of information about everything. But I believe that's a good point to move on to the next.
I do have one more, Reiner, and it's just the only reason why is it's very unique versus the other ones we've talked about.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
It's actually a retailer up in Montana, and what they do is they have their gutter connects that they do retail out of, and they have glass on the gables and sidewalls. They have very high-end retail in their main retail area. But then what they also do is they take these windjammers, and instead of doing 8mm polycarbonate on the gables, they actually build out a wooden frame and paint it to make it look very unique and it's very much only something that would be happening in retail, but they actually utilize these houses for retail. So they'll have one just for perennials, and then that gable will be painted wood that has perennials with, very aesthetic, good looking drawings and perennials painted onto that gable front. And then they just roll up the sidewalls to allow ventilation during the summertime. They might have another one for annuals that might just be extra stock that they're doing. So there is potential to use them for retail, and a lot of creative ideas can be kind of thrown into these and made very, very unique as well.
Great. Okay. So I think we touched on this a little bit, limitations. So cold frames have more limitations in that they're generally one size, and they usually use a single covering of polyfilm. However, some can have harder coverings. They're typically there to protect your plants from winter cold. for a couple of weeks, and they allow for 3 to 5 weeks before the season starts in spring to help you get a little push on propagating those plants. High tunnels are more versatile. They allow for different types of ventilation. They can include different options on the house. They can be gutter connected. Spacing is a little bit improved with having those wider widths to them. They're both non-coated structures. They're both great structures for, they're essentially a very good production house that will allow you to get your plants out in a timely manner and do it with more efficiency than, let's say, outside and under a shade cloth or something like that to prevent the scorch. So they're great products for production ranges, and as Mark said, they can even work as retail structures too. But if you're looking to have a completely controlled environment in there, some people will do a little bit of that. But when you're going to invest more into it, it's probably a point to start looking at an engineered structure to have the scalability of expanding or adding different products onto them in the future, because there's weight limitations and coating limitations. So if you're trying to do something later on, the high tunnel will never work with the coat, and same with the low tunnel. It serves its purpose, and it's a production purpose usually.
Yeah, and I would add, Reiner, all of that to say is, while there are some limitations to cold frames and high tunnels, low tunnels, whatever verbiage you're using on it, they are very versatile structures, and there's a lot that can be done in it, whether it's production, retail, just general transplanting. There's a lot that can be done in ground to grounds, and it's something that, a lot of different customers are getting creative in how they use them. And it's one of those that's always going to be a little bit cheaper than doing an engineered structure. So there's definitely a place for it in the market, and definitely can be utilized to help out your business.
Yep. And some of our customers are using them as a completely sealed house too, so you can make it happen. So we've touched on a lot of these. I think we'll just quickly go over them again, just to put a little bit of information to them. They can be vented. They can be vented on the sidewalls and the roof with double poly to create a passive house. On the high tunnels or the high tunnel grounds, we can hang heating systems on these high tunnels. You probably are going to stop at a forced air heater. Cost-wise, if you are wanting to put, let's say, a boiler in it or something that's a little more efficient, it may be cost prohibitive, or more than it's worth to create a cost-effective house or an efficient house to produce plants and push plants out of. The houses, most of our customers that are doing productions consider benching. Benching helps to utilize and maximize the space within your greenhouse, whether it be rolling benches and or stationary benches. There's many types of benches. We also have a bench seminar in the library here. If you're looking through some of our library products, we have a bench seminar that goes over many of our bench items and what happens with those. So those are for propagations, retail display, or workflow is what we use a lot of benches for.
And Reiner, I think this photo here is a pretty good representation of kind of a cold frame, adding all of the optional extras included in it. So seen on this one here, you have a swing out vent at the bottom of the gable. This greenhouse is actually buried a little bit. But then inside of that swing out vent, you have an evaporative pad wall, and on the other gable end, you have mechanical exhaust fans. So essentially, they've turned this cold frame into a fully functioning, mechanically cooled greenhouse. Instead of, they basically utilize the structure just because it's such a versatile structure, and by adding all of those optional upgrades to it, have a fully functioning greenhouse that they're able to grow in year round. They use it kind of as a cold frame during the colder months, but then during the summer, open up that vent, turn on the pad pump, and open up those exhaust fans, and are able to fully cool that greenhouse as well. So there's a lot of options you can do with it, and just kind of all going back to how versatile these structures really are. There's just so many ways that you can utilize them, and this one also has a corrugated polycarbonate roof on it. So again, kind of going pretty far off from what a standard cold frame would be, but utilizing that structure to achieve the goals of the business and what you really need at the end of the day.
Yeah, and to that point, just because it probably has a lot of additional items in that house probably has automated controls. It likely has a control that takes care of the temperature in the house, the vent, and the fans that will run it at certain set points. Those controls make more sense once you're getting ventilation involved in it or any additional items. If you're using one or two set points, the thermostat might be there. But the nice thing about this automated control, it will open the vent, get everything running, and then it'll open the louvers and fans to start working on the other end if the temperature or the humidity starts to change within the house.
And you are correct. That house has a full environmental controller, and it is essentially fully automated at this point.
All right. I'll move on to the next. All right. This is, if you have any questions, I don't know, Janine, if we have any questions.
Yeah, we'll give everybody a few minutes to enter some questions. In the meantime, let me ask you one.
Sure.
How do you guys weigh or tell your customers, how do you weigh that cost and benefit of like upgrading to a more permanent structure versus like maintaining multiple cold frames or multiple high tunnels?
Yeah, so Mark might have a few words too, but I can tell you from just the example I gave you. So that example I gave you that they use in a propagation house. So they have controls in that house too, and they're pretty high end, but they have pad walls and mechanical ventilation. So those houses just turn products all the time, and it's usually one crop. It's a monocrop there, so they're usually working with one cultivar, and they'll run it through so it can have the same temperatures in there. So they can move. I think they move out every 2 or 3 months is what they said, and they have those 6 houses. So they'll start a variety in each house and just keep moving. And once one gets empty, they'll move to the next. The engineered structure they have of ours. The reason they like the engineered structure, they did a couple things with it. It allows them to get a head house, which has a break room and a bathroom for the workers, which is great. But then inside the house, they have underbench heating, which gets the heat directly to the root zone. They fog. They have a pad wall too and vents. They have partition walls in between each house. So they're able to separate each house in different sections, and it allows them more equipment. They have watering booms, heat pipes. So that it's just carrying capacity, and then what you're looking for, you have more versatility in a engineered house with being able to put different items that you're needing for production and hone into something. As a lot of the high tunnels or ground to grounds, you're usually doing a single crop and just trying to produce in bulk and get something out. They're great for that.
Yeah, Reiner, I think you kind of hit the nail right on the head there. The only thing I would add is, depending on what the business model is and what the production schedule looks like, almost any greenhouse operation you can go to and you can ask what's their biggest expense, it's almost always going to be labor. And when you're doing ground to grounds versus a gutter connect house, in a ground to ground, you have to go in from one greenhouse, out to the next greenhouse, out to the other one. And you're constantly just not necessarily wasting time, but utilizing some of that valuable time while you're actually on the clock, going from one greenhouse to the other. Whereas in a gutter connect facility, all you have to do is walk across the column line, which is a foot, not even, and you're already in that next zone. And another thing you can do too is irrigation. Is you're not necessarily having to run your irrigation pipes underground to make sure that they don't freeze, because they're always inside the greenhouse on a gutter connect, and you can do different zonings. There's just a lot more that you can do from a systems perspective inside of a gutter connected greenhouse. But I would say labor efficiency is definitely probably the number one thing that a lot of people see on a gutter connect versus a ground to ground system such as these.
Yeah, one point that made me think of, Mark, is so when you travel to greenhouses, you always ask people what they do differently, and especially in the retail zone, they'll always tell you they wish they would have gone more or built more greenhouses. It wasn't enough. So the one nice thing about these windjammers, and they don't necessarily lend themselves to retail projects per se, but Mark had a couple people do it. They allow you to add on to at a very reasonable cost. If you were looking at one house, maybe two houses is only a little bit more, and now you've doubled your capacity. Where if you're going with an engineered product and you have a high-end house and you're adding systems into it, it can be quite a bit more. But if you're looking for a growing space and then looking to double your growing production, these lend themselves to that by adding an extra one each time.
Also adding weather into it as well, Reiner, right? Just going, when you're in ground to grounds, going from one greenhouse to the next greenhouse, you have to go outside. Mm-hmm. And it might be some places in my territory. I was up in Montana earlier this year and it was negative 30 degrees outside. So the last place you want to be is outside. Right. Or if it's raining, you're going to get rained on versus a gutter connect house. You're always under cover. You know, it's not the negative 30 outside that you would have to experience. So there's, again, it kind of comes back to a lot of that, but each one kind of has its place in the market, and that's not to say one's better than the other. It kind of all comes down to what's best for your business and what makes your facility operate 1% better than the next guy, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, speaking of weather, like realistically, when you get in those hardiness zones of 4 or below, what realistically can you expect as far as performance from the cold frames and the high tunnels?
I'll let you take that, Mark. You're probably
yeah, and it's a lot of it's going to be dependent on location. Where I'm at in Colorado, it might be negative 5 degrees outside, but we're getting a full 12 hours of sunlight. So obviously having sun enter that greenhouse all day is going to help elevate those temperatures. But then on the flip side, I'm originally from Ohio, and Ohio also experiences temperatures down in the negatives. But I swear in Ohio, the sun doesn't shine for 4 months straight. So from November until February, you're only getting very minimal sunlight. So then actually heating up that cold frame strictly off the solar heat gain is going to be significantly less than what you would experience in Colorado or even beautiful California where Reiner's at. So again, it's one of those that's going to come, a lot of it's going to come down to location, but in Colorado, it works great for us out here. But in Ohio, I would be a little bit more weary about looking at doing something along those lines.
Yeah. And there, you can always add the option of heat in these houses. They will accept heaters in there, and it's just a matter of what your heat source is, if you're using propane or natural gas, and what the costs are for your business, if it makes sense.
And on that, the train of the heaters too, is some of my customers don't add heat to make it a perfect environment. Essentially what they do is add the minimal amount of heat that they can just to strictly keep plants alive. So if it's, say, up in Montana for my territory and it's negative 5 degrees and on a cloudy day and it's actively snowing, they're not looking to raise that interior temperature of that greenhouse up to 60 degrees, 70 degrees. They're looking to keep it at 50, 55, just enough for the plants to make it through that rough 3-day stretch. And then from there, they would turn off the heat and then let the cold frame kind of take back over what its advantages actually are.
Yeah. And then maybe lastly, just to wrap up, have you guys seen any kind of cold frame failure or high tunnel, things that maybe you want to share with growers that they shouldn't do with these cold frames or high tunnels?
Yeah, and that's one of those where there's a lot of different constructions of cold frames, and there's a lot of them that are built a lot stronger than other ones, I would say. Where I'm at in Colorado, the only time that we've really seen a cold frame go down was by a tornado. The customer actually had a field of 20 different ground-to-grounds in a 5x4 orientation. And somehow, some way, the tornado came in, hit the one directly in the middle, and destroyed that. But all of the other ones were fine. I've seen some of our cold frames have 2 foot of snow in it, and obviously, when you see 2 foot of snow, you want to go and clear some of it off, because the structure is not engineered for that. You want to get it off as soon as possible. But it's one of those that we've seen a lot of snow on some of ours before, but it really does come down to location. I'm sure Reiner has a much different experience with his ground-to-grounds than what I would see out in the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. And it like you said, it all depends on the area and how you do it. I would say I haven't seen too many failures in the sense of them going down for weather in my area. One thing you're always worried about is how much you put on the cold frames. Surprisingly, these cold frames hold up to a lot of stress. We have people hanging plants off of them, which is always, they're not engineered for that, but where Mark said there was a couple of feet, we've had where people have, hundreds of hanging baskets on these plants, or they have vegetables tied up to the W truss. They're not necessarily made to withstand that, but most of these cold frames in our line have held up to that. I've only had one go down to fire. It was a pretty good sized forest fire, so there's not much you can do with the forest fire. It just melted and twisted the metal.
Yeah, those would definitely be extreme circumstances for sure. So, all right. Well, we have one last question came in. Can farmer or growers build windjammers or columbines themselves?
Absolutely. These are meant to be kits. So we have a booklet that basically runs from step 1 to step 100. I can't remember how many steps. I think it's about a 50-page book. I haven't seen it in a little bit, but it's a pretty exhaustive one. Just make sure you're a good communicator and the people you're with are even keeled, because there's nothing like putting together a piece of furniture with someone and then getting mad at them the whole time. So it can be frustrating, but it's meant for anyone to put up. And we also, if that's not something you're interested in, we also have builders within the area that we can always recommend to you, but it is definitely meant for somebody to do on their own.
And a big thing there too, Reiner, is I would say the design of the structure is intended for that. The design of the structure is intended for it to be, not to have to hire a really expensive builder to come out that you might have to do with the gutter connect, just because the gutter connect structure is going to be a little bit more complex. The low tunnel and high tunnels are, I wouldn't say super basic, but definitely designed with the end customer who's putting it up in mind.
Okay. I think that is everything. So Mark and Reiner, thanks so much for being with us today and talking cold frames with us. And just want to let everybody know that their contact information is there, and they're always happy to answer questions. So feel free to reach out. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you'd like to get a recap of this webinar or see ones that you missed in the past, you can always go to Bright Talk. For the webinars, you can also sign up for them there. And we also put these webinars on our YouTube channel, so you can check both of those resources out. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Have a great day, everybody.